and that creates more jobs and more investment. The driver is not the investment, it's the consumer. That reverses the image that capitalism drives the economy. No, this is saying capitalism follows the flaneur. The flaneur is the leader. Taste and choosing those things which match your taste are the critical drivers. That's what it means in China today to move from a production to a consumption-driven economy. It reverses the normal theory about how the whole economic system works. That's why it's hard to incorporate, but why I'm stressing it. I'm not saying this is that you need to, that you can or should take this from a capitalist tradition like the U.S. You can take this from a Marxist theorist and look at and how did this break into Marxist theorizing. Benjamin was the key person who introduced consumption into Marxist analysis. That's the big revolution. But he did it. He didn't hold up a flag and say, "I'm changing Marxist at all." He did the opposite. He continued to write as if he was a Marxist like the others. He used, when he talked about Haussmann, he would talk about this will permit the capitalists and the establishment to put down the revolution. And he uses many classical Marxist terms in the essay. Class struggle, class conflict, proletarian, bourgeois. Those are all key concepts in the essay. But the flaneur then comes in, as do other things like looking at the beginnings of, they had little machines which would project light through slides. It was the beginnings of what later became movies and film, and then videos, and then videos on the internet and so forth. That is the beginnings of that kind of technologically driven consumption activity were things he wrote another essay on photography and how photography could be either high quality and aesthetically informed, or it could be just snapshots that you take quickly. He was, in that sense, he was fighting with Adorno, who was saying, you know, this, if it's mechanically reproduced, it's fudge. It's low status, bad art. So Benjamin in that essay did not cite Adorno at all, but he's basically saying the Parisians are doing, some brilliant photographers in Paris are doing this as art. And similarly, the film can become artistic. These kinds of reproduced art can also be aesthetically high in quality. Okay, that was an aesthetic revolution related to this. In that way, he laid the groundwork for joining the analysis of mass culture and popular culture, rather than saying we have bourgeois and proletarian art and they're in conflict. He's showing how they come together. Okay, and that's where we are today in the last 20 years. He was 50 or more years ahead of many of the people still arguing about these in literature and comp literature and sociology departments today. Okay, I made one point quickly in passing that the flaneur was a man in the arcade project. After 1890, the drivers were no longer men, they were women. So the women were shopping because they were not in the street. That is, the arcade were still in the street, and the street had a little bit of potential risk. There could be thieves, people could come up and rob you, they could steal your purse, I mean, they could hit you or whatever. So you needed to have a man protect the woman. Okay, in the department store that was not true. That women felt safe. They could walk around inside one big building, and so they did the shopping more on their own. What happened to the men? Okay, there's their writings on this now. They went into horseback riding. That is, the gentleman of leisure, either full-time leisure, sort of the old aristocratic style, or part-time leisure, the visitor from England or whatever. Horseback riding, hunting. They would go out and hunt in the woods and the like. That is, these were the activities which had been there for a long time, but the point is there was a gender change in terms of roles, so that within the urban context, these men were no longer as visible as, and so, in a sense, in many respects, there was from then until today, women have been more important as leaders in many of these consumption activities. They're more often aesthetically sensitive than within a family. They help the children dress. They buy the clothes or the necktie for their husbands. They'll have a sense of taste. Where should we go on a vacation? How should we redecorate the house? What colors should we have on the rug or the furniture? Women tend to be more important in this roughly since this, and so Paul Lazarsfeld, even to push this a little further, but to illustrate the point more dramatically, came here as a Viennese Marxist, 1933-34. And he'd worked with trying to mobilize in proletarian Marxist manner the young working class men in Vienna, as well as women, but especially men. Okay, and he saw pretty much a classic Marxist view of how the political system worked. He came to America 34, 35, 36, and he started. He had culture shock. He said, "This is totally different." So he started to work on consumption and how do people buy tomato soup, and how do corporations market products. He worked on that sort of thing. Then he did the first major surveys of voting in the in the world. One was called first was called the People's Choice. The second big one was called Voting with Berelson, Lazarsfeld, and McPhee in the 40s and the 50s. Okay, they did surveys. They were not the kind of, later on the University of Michigan pioneered with their national surveys of citizens, which were done more atomistically. That is, each citizen in a national sample of citizens was given, maybe 1,500 citizens were analyzed. In the earlier work of Lazarsfeld, which started this, they studied one town, Elmira, New York, or a town in the Midwest. That is, they'd look at people, and then they had in mind the kind of thing that was actively discussed in this last year with Trump and Hillary Clinton. How might people change month by month by month through the whole year of the presidential debates? They followed that, and they re-interviewed every month because they really wanted to look for change. But they also wanted to have the local context, and they asked people about, who do you talk to? Who told you you might vote in a different way? That is, they wanted to build a model of how do people make decisions about who to vote for. Lazarsfeld would summarize this by saying, the classic American voter is a group of 3, 4, 5 women who shop together on a Saturday or Sunday. They may be secretaries in an office or in a big company. In their leisure time on Saturday, they may shop together, talk together, have lunch together, and they talk about shoes, about dresses, about their children or whatever. But then they also may say, and who are you going to vote for? So Lazarsfeld basically was saying, the political system is driven by shopping for red shoes. And the woman who was the leader at shopping for clothes would often be what he called the opinion leader for politics as well. That was a real revolution. So we get Benjamin here saying the flaneur is changing Marxist theory, and Lazarsfeld was saying, yeah, it's a woman not doing politics. They did not have a union. They didn't have a communist party or a socialist party where you'd have men saying, vote. We're here because of our jobs. We will vote for the Communist Party because the party tells us we must. No. You'd have women together going shopping, having fun, enjoying life, and then saying, yeah, we should vote for Eisenhower. He's a nice man. He's a family man. That was a revolution. In political science analysis of who votes and where and why and how. And so they did another book called The People's Choice, which analyzed how individuals could shop and make decisions in a wide variety of areas, often driven, but that is, okay, I won't go too far. I'm making a key point about the dynamics here of Benjamin, and want to keep it more specifically urban. But there's a, in the political sociology course, we elaborate that. Okay. We got some of the main comments. We haven't quite specifically and explicitly joined this with what Heeson talked about. How can we do that? You see where I'm going, but how do we get to what she talked about? And a key part is Balzac and Baudelaire. And one or two if you talked about people coming to Paris as intellectuals, that they would attract other people like Picasso. And Balzac wrote about that, 1830 and so forth, that we can live in a neighborhood within Paris where we'll have lots of these artists and intellectuals living together, and they can be anti-bourgeois. That is, we won't follow the lifestyle of those bourgeois people with their families and their servants and their nice houses and so forth. Instead, we can do anything we want. That is, there was an intellectual independence combined with a sort of artistic innovation idea and an anti-bourgeois that, and he pushed further. He said, creativity comes from intellectuals and artists, and to be artistic we need to be able to break from the traditional family and work organizations. And we can do this better if we live in a separate neighborhood where we see other artists and writers in cafes and restaurants, and we're not polluted by these middle class bourgeois ideas. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it seems like cities are trying to simulate that.
What simulates it?
Cities by undertaking massive public projects that create things like arcades and grand boulevards and she gave the example of a highway in Seoul that was turned into a park, and so creating the sense of separation from the rest of the consumerist city, still actually up to it.
Okay, so you're joining us with what Heeson talked about on Monday. Yes. No.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's
Exactly.
I think it's supposed to have that spirit, but it comes from kind of an opposite place.
Okay. Okay. In Seoul, it's good that you brought in now immediately Seoul as an Asian case, because beauty, getting rid of the pollution of the cars, restoring the banks of the river, making it a nice place to walk, were all in a sense beautification, which you had more generally shared. But the next step in the analysis was what I'm getting to, of the artists want to be independent of the lifestyle of the bourgeoisie. And in that sense, Heeson probably got into this as well, talking about the bohemian or the boho ethos or values. What did she say about that? Anybody? Yeah?
They're the French planner, I can't say it, but they are centered around kind of that lifestyle still, and so that is who these cities are trying to attract.
So in terms of, if we start with sort of examples, in Baudelaire himself in his lifestyle was bohemian in the sense that he was against, that is, one of their slogans was to shock the bourgeoisie, tell them to go to hell, that is, and this is more explicit as we go on, say, with the surrealists. Shock people who want to have a nice artistic entertainment evening, shake them up. And the German expression is, comment?
I have a question, like the idea that, you know, Bohemians wanted to distinguish themselves from the bourgeoisie. Does that mean that they were coming from the bourgeoisie?
Mostly, yes.
Which is still kind of the case today.
Which is what?
It's still kind of.
Sure, sure. I mean, Marx was not a farmer or a worker. His father was middle class, as were most of these people. But ideologically, they saw the numbers in the future of the economy was the numbers of the workers, and so that should be. So ideologically, they wanted to be that way. So this then developed. I mean, there was an opera, La Bohème. The label came from people who emigrated to Paris from Bohemia, that one region where they were a little bit different in lifestyle. But it's now a term which has then been transformed by David Brooks, New York Times writer, into bobos. What are bobos? Bohemian bourgeois. Both French terms, but the idea is that you're bohemian in lifestyle, but you have bourgeois income. And so examples people cite are, say, Bill Clinton, who may have had, I mean, some people joked at the time, he's the first black president of the United States because his lifestyle wasn't proper white middle class. He had too many girlfriends and so forth. And he'd go to Hollywood with, and entertain with, you know, and he'd play the saxophone, even though he was supposed to be proper president. So he did things which were seen as somewhat bohemian, but he had a pretty good income. And so Brooks has written about this combination. That is, you don't have to be a penniless artist in order to be a bohemian. You can, that is, so as the artists or the people who have this, and so Rich Lloyd's book on Wicker Park in Chicago says, initially, and it's a classic kind of gentrification kind of discussion, you may have an artist or set of artists who initially move into an area like Soho in New York, Wicker Park in Chicago, and they define with an ethos of bohemia, that this is a cool place to be. We're not traditional middle class. Instead, we're more cool. We're out at night. We're entertaining. We're in bars and so forth. More open, individualistic, free expression, etc. And that lifestyle then attracts others who may be stockbrokers, lawyers, doctors, and so forth, but who are young, especially singles, and who move into the Wicker Parks or the Sohos. That drives up the rent, and then the artists are driven out so that's the classic simple gentrification story. But the point is, the bobo or bohemian ethos lives on in a place like Soho and Wicker Park, even if the people whose jobs are to be artists can't afford to stay there anymore. And so Wicker Park, in that sense today, is still culturally different as a neighborhood from Lincoln Park, which is more, it's ironically, Lincoln Park in the 1940s and 50s was a more artistic neighborhood, but it's become sort of the establishment upper status north side, or the Gold Coast. I mean, so those areas are not visibly bohemian at all. And so Wicker Park is, even if the artists have moved elsewhere. So this gives us a theory of neighborhood dynamics and change within cities by drawing on these kinds of sources and building on the case of practice. Okay. Other comments on this? I mean, these are the main points I wanted to get out. Other comments, questions, reactions? Yes. What's your name?
Hannah?
Yeah, Hannah Breslov. Okay. Yeah.
There was an article in the New York Times this morning about, and this is going to seem related, about like how memes may have shaped the landscape of the election, and how kind of coolness sorted itself to support or not support certain candidates. And could that be seen as an extension of what you're talking about, how women in the department stores end up shaping the political conversation by having good taste and political kind of leanings and attitudes? It's like the idea that your status via like cultural capital translates into actual political influence.
Yes. Yes. And this, and I mean, we had a BA and an MA on this last year on how people like Madonna or cool, that is, many of the artists and bands who might have been invited to the White House to celebrate the inauguration of Donald Trump refused. They said, I will not support, in any way this president. And so that kind of political engagement over social media, clearly, but the way you put it, your first term was memes.
Right. So just kind of internet images that come out of people. It's not produced
Average
by the
people,
campaign.
yeah,
It's not
okay.
produced by the
Sure.
campaign. It's not official
Sure.
material, but it's usually comedic or making fun of or supporting. Like Bernie Sanders is on unicorn or something like that.
Okay. So yes, I mean, maybe not exactly, but the spirit of what you're saying is right on. So thank you. Other comments, questions? Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah.
But just going back to earlier in the lecture when you were talking about Benjamin, how he introduced consumption into the Marxist analysis of capitalism, I guess. And I was wondering what would be the corollary for how does that explain the beginnings of capitalism? You know what I mean? If consumption is a huge part of his analysis, then how does he think about the beginnings of how does this big thing arise? Because within industrial stuff it's much more clear. So.
Well, I mean, the simple answer would be the political leaders of the city of Paris said no industry. And in a sense, I mean, Benjamin wasn't making the decision, but he was trying to understand how could these leaders build, let's say, so that is, you can build a modern, economically advanced society without heavy industry. So in that sense, I guess you could, if you want to have a bigger label for it, you could call it there are multiple paths within capitalism. There are multiple types of capitalism, rather than saying, especially at the city level. There are many different cities. That's one reason that we can learn more about everything by studying cities and neighborhoods, because you've got, as you look, drill down to the individual city and neighborhood level, things don't fit the simpler story. And this is Paris is a perfect case of that. Okay, that's the short, simple. Sophie.
Just real quick, because I know it's time to go, but just connecting Lazarsfeld to Elazar, has there been theorization of feminine political cultures, or specifically women's political cultures? Because, this is a model that I can see fitting in some places, but in Iowa, where I grew up, for instance, and where my mother grew up and her mother grew up, women's political cultures where we were told explicitly, as a woman, you do not talk about politics, sex, or I can't remember the third one. But, and it wasn't until my mom met my dad, who was a Latin American leftist, that she became, politically active. But so in that time, I'd hear stories even my grandmother would just vote for whoever was most attractive on election day, and so that was considered pretty and proper, and you don't talk about or think about these things. So is it just different kinds of feminine political cultures that we're talking about? Because I see this model fitting maybe in more urban areas or intellectual areas, but not necessarily everywhere throughout the 20th century.
Yeah, I'd give the quick answer to the same as I did to the last question, namely, there are multiple paths in ways to be a woman, as there are to be a capitalist. But more specifically, or to be a socialist or a Marxist. But more specifically, take a look there's a paper in the American Journal of Sociology on 4 kinds of lesbian cultures in 4 different cities in the U.S. And so even if you take not just women in general, but lesbians, and then look at their lifestyles. That is, instead of labeling them as the same culturally because of because they have women as partners, instead you look at how do they dress, how do they lead their lives, what are their relationship to these images of lifestyle, who do you vote for? Four drastically different places from Maine to Ithaca, New York, to California. I'm blocking on the name of the author, but I'll unless anybody else. Okay, we're blocking on the name. But anyway, if you look at that paper for a serious ethnographic study in these four different cities and answering directly your question.
Cool.
Okay, thank you.